Welcome to our service. Obviously, these are unusual times and unusual circumstances. Thank you for joining us today on video. Glad we have the opportunity and the means to be able to do this. I'm glad we started this a little bit over a year ago, so we had everything already set up and ready to go. Other churches may be scrambling, but we have a system in place, and you all have been using it. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for watching the videos that we've done last week, Sunday morning and midweek especially. Many of you watch that. I'll continue to do that during this time. I'll record our Sunday morning message and upload it so you have it on Sunday morning ahead of time. And then we'll have a midweek message I'll put in there Tuesday or Wednesday, depending on how things are going and what the schedule may be. But thank you for joining us. Don't have too many announcements to give you. Obviously, there's not anything going on at the church facility right now. But many of you have asked, I got a couple calls, I got a couple texts and emails about tithing. And you have really two options. One, feel free to mail your tithe to the church. We'll receive it here at the mailbox. I'll make sure Al Raniero, our treasurer, gets that. I don't open it. We don't open it. If it's obviously a tithe check, we send it right over to Al and let him take care of it. Or you can try our online. We do use the ministry Tithely, and there's a link for that at the bottom of the home page of our website. It's really easy to set up. If you are adept at using a smartphone and the apps on that, they have a really good app. You can just download the app, set up our church, and you think you'll find that very easy to use. I use that as well, and I think you'll find that a very easy means. So one way or the other, we appreciate it. As I know a lot of you may be struggling or having hours cut back at work or finding work upended or things like that. We understand, of course, here at church. We still are trying to not only meet the bills of the ministry of the church, but also keep up with our missionaries. And while we're obviously okay right now, just starting this, we'll see how this unfolds over the next couple weeks and try to keep things going as they are. And so thank you for your help. Thank you for your support. We appreciate that very much. I want to preach today a message from Psalm 23. And so often Psalm 23 gets used at funerals. And because of that, I think it has a somber tone to it. At least we've given it a somber tone. And so Psalm 23, I want to take a little different angle with it today. I'm going to read it. Obviously, it should be familiar to all of us. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. As I came to this week and dealing with all that we're dealing with, both personally and as a church ministry, I wanted to share some words of encouragement with you this week. And just one thing kept coming back to my mind, and it was something that I shared and dealt with a number of years ago, and I thought it was very pertinent today as we are dealing with this coronavirus pandemic and issue in our country and worldwide. Many of you know or remember about 5 years ago, in fact, exactly 5 years ago, our son Philip hiked the Appalachian Trail. And he started in Georgia, and he hiked 2,000 miles all the way up to Maine. The Appalachian Trail is 2,200 miles long from Georgia up to Mount Katahdin in Maine. Philip stopped once he got into the state of Maine, but he covered over 2,000 miles, and he covered every state that's included in the Appalachian Trail. He still has a desire to go back and hike that last the 100-mile wilderness and up Mount Katahdin. He'll do that at some point here later on. But he took on that epic challenge in 2015. One of the things that I was able to do along with that, a couple days here or there, I hiked with him. But most importantly during that time, I was what they deem a trail manager. And that is, I was kind of his contact in the real world while he's lost in the woods for 2,000 miles. And while he's walking and hiking and kind of out of touch with everything, I'm his contact. And so because of that, I do things like packed up care packages and mailed them to certain post offices along the way that would help him. I kept in touch, his mom and I, we kept in touch with him via the cell phone when he had cell phone coverage. We're able to tell him what was coming up, what the weather might be, what's going on, what's happening, what to look out for, what stores. There was a couple of times we were even able to help him when he wasn't sure which way to go and had gotten sidetracked on the wrong trail or something because of technology. We were able to look up, see where he was supposed to go and help him get back on track. And so just some of the various things that came along with helping him while he was out there. Bill Bryson, the famous author that hiked the Appalachian Trail and then wrote a very popular book and later a movie about the Appalachian Trail, he talked about the fact that all you do is walk up and down hills through a tunnel in the woods. You're just walking through a cleared out tunnel of trees. And I think overall, he expressed maybe a little bit of disappointment that while you're walking along the trail, you don't see a lot. There's a few vistas, there's a few places up at the mountaintop where you're able to get a good view, but most of the time, day in and day out, all you can see is the tunnel of trees around you. You just see, a few feet or, 50 feet or so off each side of the trail, and that's about it, and it looks very much the same and very monotonous day after day. I was thinking about those things as we're dealing with this current pandemic in our country and where we're at and what we're going through. We talked a number of years ago as we had a Wednesday night Bible study about the fact that God has a helicopter view of our lives. He's able to see what's ahead. He's able to see the whole plan. He's able to see where we've been, where we're going, where we're at, and everything. Often we are much like that hiker on the trail, just kind of in the tunnel, where we can only really see what's around us. We have memories of what's behind us, of course, but we have no idea what's ahead. We have no idea what may be coming. We have no idea how the days may unfold. The Bible talks a lot about the fact of life being a journey, a walk. Proverbs 3:6, "In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths." And so we see the idea of a walk, of a journey. Paul talks about finishing the course, finishing the walk, finishing the race. We talk about things like being on the straight and narrow. We're supposed to walk in the Spirit and walk in the light. And so there's a number of different analogies, pictures, illustrations, particularly verses, about the fact of walking. And so I thought we'd tie those together today and to talk a little bit about this journey that we're on, this walk that we're on, where I think we would all agree we're just kind of looking at this current situation around us. And we went through a week where all new words and phrases became commonplace in our vocabulary. All of a sudden, we're talking about not only coronavirus, but COVID-19. I don't think I need to hear anymore the term social distancing. It's everywhere. It just comes up in every possible format. Quarantine, hoarding, all these things are just common words that we're using every day now that we probably didn't use a whole lot even just a week ago. And so we're looking around us, and we're in that tunnel of woods around us, and we can't see. We don't really know what's ahead. We don't know what's coming. We don't know what's in store. We look at some countries like China or Italy where they've struggled with this coronavirus. We look at maybe at some like South Korea that seem to have gotten a handle on it, and we're not sure where we're headed and what's going on and what's going to happen and how serious this is and how this is going to affect our jobs and our finances and the stock market and the economy. And we're not sure about the health risk or otherwise. And just so many things we don't know, and we're kind of stuck in a tunnel of woods, taking one step after the other, not really sure. Not really sure what's next, not really sure what's going on. And so I wrote some things down here that I thought maybe would be helpful to us. And I entitled this little thing, God is my trail manager. And by saying that, please understand, I'm not in any way trying to diminish who God is and the magnitude of God. I'm just trying to give some perspective that we don't have to worry because we have someone that has a world view. We have someone that has a helicopter view. We have someone that has a big view of what's going on. We don't have to sit here and worry about the fact we can't see too far ahead because God can. And so I wrote down, number one, God made the path of life that we're traveling on. God made everything. He knows. He made what's going on. He's already outlined the plan. He's already written the script. He already knows who holds tomorrow and what's going to happen tomorrow and how tomorrow's going to unfold. He knows all that. We don't have to worry about that. He already has a plan for us. We're just part of the plan. But God already has that all mapped out for us. For 3 days in May of 2015, my brother and I went and we hiked with Philip as he was hiking through the Shenandoah National Forest. And hiking with him for 3 days, they were some tough days. Now, Philip would tell you, and I know this, that the mountains there were not nearly as big as they had been in Georgia, or as they will be when he finally got up to New Hampshire and the White Mountains. I am aware of that. But for someone who wasn't used to walking in the mountains like that, it was hard. It was hard on my knees. It was hard carrying that pack on my back. It was hard going up and down the hills. We did have one of the heaviest rainstorms that he encountered on the whole trail was while I was with him. And so we had some little creeks that you were supposed to be able to jump across became raging mountain creeks, raging mountain streams that we had to wade across and things like that. And so we had some obstacles that we had to deal with. But as we're going through this, obviously you're hiking from shelter to shelter to shelter. And there are shelters built all along the trail. Those are the designated camping areas. Those are where the springs are that you can get something to drink, where the facilities are that you can use and things like that. And so you hike from shelter to shelter to shelter. And, I think probably most days about 3 o'clock in the afternoon after we had hiked for, 20 miles and up and down mountains, sweat in our eyes, we're maybe wet from getting through the creeks and tired and aching and hungry and exhausted and mosquitoes are biting you. And you're asking so how far is it? How much farther are we going? You didn't know. We had little guidebooks. Philip had a guidebook he could pull out and give us some idea. But I think as you're hiking up a mountain, you're like, is that the top? And you get up there and realize it kind of curves around. Okay, well, maybe up there's the peak, and you hike a little farther. Well, that's not quite it. You got to go around this bend, and then, well, hopefully that's the top, and you're not quite really sure. And there's a guy named Benton Mackaye. Benton Mackaye was the guy who developed, laid out, outlined, came up with the whole Appalachian Trail. He wanted it tied together as one big trail across the eastern United States. Wouldn't it have been nice to go hiking with Benton? You could have asked him things, and he'd be like, he knew. Why? Because he built it. He knew how far it was. He knew where the next shelter was. He knew what was around the next bend. He laid it out. He picked the trail. He developed it. He designed it. And so to have hiked with him, you could have just asked him, hey, Benton, what's next? And he knows. He knows. He knows how far we're going to go. He knows when we have to get started and when we're going to stop because he's been there. He's walked it. Listen, God made the trail. God outlined our lives. The coronavirus didn't surprise God. God knew about it before you and I even existed. God knew what was coming. God knew what was in store. God knew the different challenges we would be up against. Number 2, I wrote down, God knows what's ahead. Again, helicopter view. God knows what's ahead. I don't. Again, that's why as Philip hiked the trail, I was his trail manager. I'd look ahead and send him text messages and send him mail to a close post office and things like that. This is what's happening, and this bridge is closed right now, and they're rerouting the trail at this place, and be sure to stop at this store to get your supplies because there won't be any for the next 35 miles or whatever, and be able to give him some insight of where to go and where to stop, and I was able to look ahead. And in a much more important and much broader way, God knows what's ahead for us. It's why the Bible tells us, give no thought for tomorrow. Tomorrow will take care of itself. Why? God knows. God knows what's ahead for tomorrow. God knows what we're going to deal with tomorrow. God knows what we're going to need tomorrow. Thank goodness. God knows what we're going to be dealing with tomorrow. God has it all mapped out. God has it all planned out. God can see what's ahead when you and I can't see. God is able to have us prepared for what may be in store. Number 3, I wrote down, and this should be so reassuring to us. God became man and dwelt among us. And so God doesn't only have a heaven view of our lives, but he's already been here and walked upon this earth. So he didn't just make it, and he not only sees ahead, but he's already come in the flesh, lived like you and I, and walked through this life. You and I are dealing with being locked in our houses right now and not having the availability of some things that we were used to just a week or two ago. Jesus lived in the midst of a Roman Empire, and he lived in a country that was under the Roman control and had lost their freedom. Jesus lived in a time when people didn't believe him and accused him of blasphemy and ultimately crucified him. He was hated, despised. The Bible says he had no place to lay his head. He had no financial backing of any sort, of course. Jesus took off the glory of heaven and came and walked with us. Jesus has walked where we're walking. And so we're not worshiping a God that is distant. We're worshiping a God who has walked in our footsteps. I think to better say it, we're walking in his because he's already been here. He's walked this life. He's been through the trials. He's felt the pain. He's had the discomfort. He's felt the hunger. He's been humiliated. He's been misunderstood and accused of things that he didn't do. Jesus was attacked often and dealt with a lot of very serious things. And we can take comfort in the fact that he understands. He knows what we're going through. He's dealt with those things. And so in the midst of all the craziness of the world around us, isn't it a comfort to know that Jesus really does understand? That's why we sing the song, "Oh, yes, he cares. I know he cares." His heart is touched with our grief. Why? He's been here. He's walked it. He knows it. Number 4, God knows what we're going to need and what we're not going to need as we go through this life. Isn't it interesting? I think this is the human aspect of it, but God, we often talk about the fact that God supplies our needs, and that's true, he does. But God also removes things we don't need. Think about that. He knows the things that weigh us down. And so, again, back to the Appalachian Trail, Philip's hiking the trail. Everybody's really serious about their gear and what they're taking. You want a tent that only weighs so much, and you want a backpack that's lightweight but big enough, and you need a sleeping bag that's going to keep you warm, but you're going to go through different climates, so it can't weigh too much, and you got to take the right clothes and the right shoes, and you got to find food that's going to be easy to pack and not necessarily need to be cooked, and all these different things that you have to pack, and you try to keep your pack weight down in maybe the mid-20s or at least under 30 pounds and closer to 20 if you can, and you try to keep that weight down so that it doesn't, because you're going to carry it for 2,000 miles, so you don't want that packed away too much, and so you're really keeping things down to a bare minimum of what you need. And as you get into different towns and villages and stops and little hostels along the way and places where people take care of you, you can get some supplies, but you can't get too much and you can't take too much. And One of the interesting stories to read about on the Appalachian Trail is one of the very first hostels that you come to in Georgia after you've been on the trail for a couple days. There's a place where the trail actually goes through, literally right through an archway, goes through this old building. I forget what the building used to be. But it's used to take care of hikers now. You can sleep there, you can pick up some supplies. But the biggest thing that happens at that hostel is that's where everybody begins to unload all the things they wish they hadn't taken. They decided before they left it would make sense to take 2 pairs of shoes, 3 books to read, an axe to cut things down. And after 3 days of hiking through the mountains of Georgia, they hate nothing more than that axe they've been carrying around, that extra pair of shoes, all those books they thought they were going to. No, it all gets unloaded. Some of it gets packed up and sent back. Some of it just gets donated, give it to the next person if they want it. And then this hostel begins to accumulate a lot of materials of things they don't want. The hikers really quickly begin to figure out there are things that they need and there are things that they don't need. It's been interesting to go to the grocery store the last week. I'm sure you've been able to do that, hopefully, and be able to see what's going on out there. But very interesting to see the things that people need and the things that people don't need. Isn't it interesting right now, there is no shortage, no empty shelves, no run on soda, potato chips, tasty cakes. There's plenty of them at the store. The soda aisle's packed. There's nobody, it's packed with soda and no people. But eggs and bread and milk and water and toilet paper and all the essentials of life, boy, you can hardly keep them in there. People are picking up the meat and the frozen vegetables and the canned vegetables, and all the essentials of life are very quickly disappear. And the luxuries of life seem to be in abundance right now. God knows what we need, and God knows what we don't need. And as we go through this time of pandemic and change and being shut in and not being able to get out and things like that, I think we very quickly, begin to prioritize things in our life. But more importantly, and on a bigger scale than that, I think God begins to work in our lives and shows us the things that are really important and the things that aren't important. The things we need to be fruitful in life and the things we don't need to be fruitful in life. He begins to hone us down. What an opportunity it is right now to spend time with the Lord, to grow in Him, to be able to quiet our hearts before the Almighty, to be able to spend that needed time with loved ones, maybe to catch up on things, even catch up on sleep and catch up on rest and catch up on the things that we need. And suddenly a lot of the things we don't need are gone. And the Lord knows very much what we need, and He knows what we don't need. But here's the most important part, and I think this kind of brings it all together. God Almighty made the trail that we're walking on. And He knows what lies ahead for us. And He's come and walked this trail with us. And He knows the things we need, and He knows the things we don't need. But Psalm 23 ties it all together when we put ourselves into that example and put ourselves into that picture. We see Psalm 23 puts it all together because it tells us in verse 4, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And again, picture yourself in that tunnel of trees on life's road, where our visibility and how far we can see is very limited by our perspective. We don't know what's ahead. We don't know what's in store. We don't know what's coming. We don't know what's happening. We're a little limited in our knowledge of life. But verse 4 says, though I walk through that valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? For thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. God made the trail, knows what's ahead, came and walked it Himself. It tells us what we need, what we don't need as we journey through life. But here's the greatest part. He then takes us by the hand and walks with us. He walks the whole thing with us. He not only can oversee it, he not only designed it and laid it out, he not only walked it before we did so we have an idea of what's ahead. He not only can tell us this is what you're going to need and this is what you're not going to need, but then he's like, how about this? How about I just walk right beside you the entire way? Wow, what a promise that is. What a satisfaction it is in the Christian life, and a joy it is in the Christian life to know that God Almighty promised us, I'll never leave thee nor forsake thee. Lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the world. So when we're going through these trials of life, he is right beside us every step of the way. He knows all about it, knows how it works, knows how it's laid out, knows the things we're going to need, already has done it himself, and then comes alongside and says, tell you what, let's go. I'll take you with me. Every step of the way, I'll be right beside you. What a promise that is. And so, as we find ourselves social distancing, as we find ourselves more isolated from people and maybe even some friends and family, acquaintances and coworkers and things like that, as we find ourselves a little more alone, we are never alone if we know the Lord. We are never alone if we know him. He is always with us to guide us, to go with us, to take us along life's journey. Listen, I hope while we go through this unique time of being closed in, of being shut in, of not being able to assemble at church and not to be able to go out to dinner with friends and not to get together with loved ones. We're not having birthday parties and all the crazy stuff that has suddenly been changed in our lives. Boy, what a comfort to know that as we go along this trail, nothing is a surprise to God. And he is with us every step of the way. I hope you have a good week.